Ernie Cato with this week's #1 song. Not necessarily my #1 relative. With that comment, I guess I better be packing my bags. Here's Ricky with a song that's quickly taken over the #1 spot. He must have insulted his mother-in-law, too.
I'm a traveling man, made a lot of stops all over the world.
Before a joint session of Congress today, President Kennedy gave this country a remarkable challenge.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
Did you hear that?
Are we going to the moon? That's what the president said.
That message by President John F. Kennedy, May 25th, 1961, brings back many memories. But it really hit home for the people of South Mississippi when the government announced 5 months later, to the day, that it would build a test facility along the banks of the East Pearl River to test those rockets that were going to the moon.
The newspapers throughout the area carried the announcement of the location of the test site. Generally, quiet, settled community. It was a lovely place. I was somewhat familiar with the fact that Honey Island Swamp between the two Pearl Rivers was sort of a no man's land. Also, Devil's Swamp over to the east of the site here was just in low timberlands. The original policy for acquisition of the test site was the operational area where all of the facilities are constructed contained 13,500 acres. That was bought outright, including the mineral interest. The buffer zone, which was approximately another 120,000+ acres, the original policy was to acquire only a perpetual restrictive easement.
One of the reasons this area was selected, of course, it was a number of reasons. The physical reason for one thing, this marvelous river we had here, and then low population. Where could you find that much acreage and move that smaller amount of people?
The project was under overall management of the Marshall Space Flight Center in Huntsville, Alabama. And the people up there were really excited about the selection of this Pearl River area for the test site. After all, it was just a short distance down the Pearl River and across the inland waterways over to the Michoud Assembly Facility in New Orleans, and out the mouth of the Pearl and around the tip of Florida to Cape Canaveral, where you would launch the rockets. But even though the area was sparsely populated, NASA did have to move 5 communities to make way for the construction of the facility. They were Westonia, Santa Rosa, Napoleon, Gainesville, and Logtown.
The Gainesville community was a unique community. The Lovelace grocery store, Mrs. Louise Lovelace, who operated the store with her husband, was sort of a focal point in the community. Around the corner from the grocery store, there was a lady, and I don't remember her first name, but she was referred to as Aunt Blue. Her name was Aunt Blue Davis. When we acquired her home, as a lot of the others did, she didn't have it demolished, but she reserved the right to remove it. And she had a house mover. As I recall, his name was Daley Dronette from the Gulfport area, who loaded that house and took it up around the Nicholson area. Aunt Blue Davis never left it. She sat on the back porch in a rocking chair and went down the highway with that house. And I can still see that lady today, and I think she had maybe a niece, I believe Mrs. Freeman Davis, that rode with her as that house went down the highway up Old 43 to the Nicholson area.
A lot of us look on Senator Stennis as more of a statesman than a politician. He told us that if any of you have any trouble dealing with the Corps of Engineers on doing the eminent domain, you call me and I'll see what I can do. And he did help people who called him. It was a daytime meeting, and the way they handled the questions and answers, they had couriers, and I was one of them. People, if they had a question they wanted to ask, they had to write out the question, and then we would take it up to the podium. I don't know who the lady was. I took her question up, and her question was, why do we have to go to the moon? Senator Stennis answered that question in this way. He said, we have to go to the moon for international prestige.
Senator Stennis had another quote that day that became rather famous. He said, there's always the thorn before the rose. The thorn being eminent domain, the rose being the opportunity that those people had to play a major role in America's prestigious space program.
I was highly elated, very proud of America. I felt that, I'll tell you why I felt that way. I felt that we were part of it. Since we had given up our land and moved and everything, that we were actually part of going to the moon.
We had the challenge of building a very large rocket test facility. It was a swamp here. There wasn't anything here except the Rushan house, which is behind us. The challenge was significant. In today's dollars, that would amount to $1 billion facility. We had to build it from scratch, and when it was completed, it was going to test the awesome Saturn V rockets that were going to take men to the moon.
Jerry has been associated with Stennis Space Center for almost his entire existence. In the Apollo days, we used to see Jerry once a week as he flew down from Washington, where he was responsible for overseeing the construction of the Mississippi Test Facility in those days.
There were schedule problems. The S2 stand was a critical facility, was determined to be the most critical facility in achieving the Apollo mission. And therefore, there were lots of pressure to complete the construction on schedule.
We did not know at the time what all it took and what all it was going to take to really construct and to put together the type of facility that's required to support the space program. But as time passed and as we continued to work and continued to lay out the boundaries and the foundations for construction, the roads began to appear, power lines began to appear, buildings began to appear, then it started coming together.
We had to clear an awful lot of land. We had to put in an awful lot of facilities, many of which were very highly technical facilities, very high pressure systems and liquid oxygen and hydrogen that was going to be required, and the test stands over to a little further to the east of us. Our responsibilities for us in the early days was to construct the facilities, get it to a point to where it could be operable. And all during those days, it took about 3 years for us to finish and finalize all the facilities that's now known as the Stennis Space Center.
The construction activation phase brought out the very best of everyone. It was characterized by superb leadership. Dr. Werner von Braun, director of the Marshall Center, appointed a Navy captain, Bill Fortune, as first project manager. Captain Fortune was highly respected by his employees and especially popular in the communities. The first American flag to fly over this site, symbolizing NASA's presence here, was raised by Captain Fortune and Dr. von Braun. That event brought on a reminder of Dr. von Braun's early involvement with this facility. He was not merely an overseer or a visitor. He was a participant. In fact, he often referred to this South Mississippi site as his baby.
You know, he was a fine gentleman and a true professional and really knew how to get everybody's consensus to his ideas and how to move them forward. And Carl Heimberg and Bernie Tessman, his deputy, were in charge of his test laboratory up there in Huntsville. And we worked very closely with them developing the requirements for this facility. Carl was a hard driver, but a very, very tough and fair man, very focused on where he wanted things to go. Tessman had a good personality, had a good sense of humor, and he filled in some of the people gaps, but both of them were fun to work with. And of course we had Henry Order, and a gentleman named Gordon Artley was significant in bringing together the focus to get this place activated with 3,000 or 4,000 new employees coming on, plus 3,000 contractors, and get things done. Ken Riggs was outstanding in bringing together the test experience and requirement to our planning team.
Some people think I'm kidding when I tell them that during the months of July we had to wear a jacket, a denim jacket or some other form of jacket that was thick enough to prevent the mosquitoes from penetrating your clothing.
Rainy season, there was a lot of mud, and so that slowed things down. When we excavated for the test foundations, there were holes 40 feet deep, and so you got down to where water wanted to just bubble in the bottom, and we had to put in more deeper and deeper wells so that we could pull the water table down. Congestion, I mean, there was work going on everywhere here, and just lots of activities happening simultaneously. We had that snow, about a 10-inch snow down here in Mississippi.
We did have some unusual problems during construction, and sometimes resorted to resourceful methods to solve them, even to the point of using mules to do what modern machines couldn't accomplish. One of the photographs taken of that activity became world famous.
That picture was real famous. That picture went around from coast to coast, they told me. My boss asked me, say, "Do you know how to plow a mule?" I told him, "Yes, I do." It was kind of wet, soggy. Mule was kind of boggy, but we made it.
In the spring of 1965, Jackson Balch was appointed manager of what was soon to be officially named the Mississippi Test Facility, and with him he brought other leadership from Huntsville to fulfill the mission.
Jack Balch asked me if I would come down and be project manager on the S2 program, and it just looked like an opportunity I couldn't turn down. Working for Jack was a real learning experience too.
Jack Balch was a unique character, a lovable man in many ways, a tough taskmaster in many ways. He certainly would be an understatement on my part to say that he left an indelible mark here.
Again, he was a hard-nosed individual, but you like Jack automatically if you like competence, because he was a very competent individual.
It was just the people more than anything. People tend to remember the hardware, but it's really the people that made the hardware work.
There was considerable excitement in the air in those days with the anticipation of building and testing the vehicles that would get us to the moon. People were being trained. We were learning how to handle large volumes of hydrogen. It was an exciting time for sure.
Everything was out of the ground facility-wise. We were putting in cables, terminating cables. S2 was getting ready to finish out at Seal Beach and be shipped in here, and it was just a real beehive of activity getting ready for the first test. And as you remember, the S2 was probably the most controversial of the Saturn V stages in that it was liquid hydrogen, had a common bulkhead, and expected a lot of problems.
Well, it was pretty difficult because we were running round the clock, no days off. You know, it wasn't anything like a weekend. You just kept right on going. Coming up to the test, everybody was pretty tired, but I can remember the feeling that they certainly wanted to get it off, and there wasn't any question about we were going to do it.
It took some 25 hours after the blockhouse was sealed to get that test off. Lots of bugs in the system, things that had to be worked out, but ultimately we weren't successful, and the test was a major accomplishment, a major milestone.
And at that time, they had the countdown of the test firings on the operational intercom site-wide, and everybody would listen to the countdown, and as it got to the last few seconds, you would, if you could, go outside so that you could see the smoke and hear it.
The rocket testing started in 1966, and every rocket that was tested here performed its mission flawlessly in flight in taking our men to the moon.
Like all Americans, I remember it well. Being at home with my family, keeping my kids up all night so that they could see this historical moment, and then finally seeing Neil Armstrong step on the moon and having a sense of pride that I had some little small part of that. All the people here at MTF in those days, as we called it, the Mississippi Test Facility, felt an enormous amount of pride in the fact that we had a major role in making that happen.
The people at MTF and their neighbors didn't have long to enjoy the laurels of that fantastic mission. Even as the nation was celebrating that first lunar landing, an ill wind was brewing in the Gulf of Mexico that would change the destinies of thousands of people and the directions of the Mississippi Test Facility.
Camille came along, devastated the coast, killed several of our employees, damaged our facilities, and it was a time when our people came together. Hurricane Camille focused the attention of the country on this area, and NASA bowed its back and said, we want to help in this area, and NASA provided substantial help to the area, not only by continuing the operations here, but in many other ways in the local community.
The MTF management team, under the leadership of Jackson Balch, was engaged in a diligent search for new roles and missions even before the tragedy of Camille.
When we started hearing about the Mississippi Test Facility and the fact that the rocket testing was phasing down here, we were asked to think of things that could be done here. Assistant Center Director at Johnson Space Center, Bob Powlin, was asked to define an activity to be implemented here. And he defined this laboratory.
NASA established the Earth Resources Laboratory at MTF, and a number of federal and state agencies were also invited to utilize the facilities.
A plan was set out to convert the Mississippi Test Facility from a single agency NASA, single mission propulsion testing to a multi-agency, multi-mission federal laboratory. A great shot in the arm, however, was in the 1970 time frame. The committee met in early '71. NASA decided to put the testing for the Space Shuttle main engine here.
During his first term as administrator of NASA, Dr. Jim Fletcher decided that the installation should be renamed and its reporting changed. In June of 1974, MTF became the National Space Technology Laboratories.
That was in recognition of some of the application and technology type projects that this facility became involved in after the Apollo era. I was asked if I was interested in coming down. There was a vacancy. Jack Walsh has retired, and Henry Otter, his deputy, was acting in his capacity. And NASA asked me if I'd come down and lead this facility, and I said yes.
And he served a distinguished period of time, 12 years. And really, his major contribution, in my view, was that he took this installation from the fringes of involvement with NASA programs to the center line. And during Jerry's tenure, we had major improvements in our involvement with NASA, our relationships with other centers, our involvements in the programs. New programs were assigned to Stennis, new facilities were built. Jerry's knowledge of NASA, his leadership ability, and his knowledge of how NASA headquarters and the Congress work sure did pay off for all of us here at Stennis Space Center.
That was a great day. It was a recognition by NASA that this installation is part of the family of NASA. It was a day that we honored a great Mississippian and a great American. He had a great deal to do with this place. He was like the father of this installation. He worried and worked for its advancement and its progress ever since it was established. And he, in addition, had not only supported the programs that were here in Mississippi, but he supported the entire National Space Program. He felt it is the right program for the agency. He supported Kennedy when he announced his intention to go to the moon. And therefore, it was a great, good feeling, not only for me, but all the employees of this installation.
We feel that Senator John Stennis got the test site for us, and I think we owe him a great debt of gratitude for his effort in that.
John C. Stennis, I call Uncle John, because this was his second home. He just loved to be out here.
I felt like that when they changed it to Stennis Space Center, it was a long time coming for John Stennis, because he deserved everything. Every recognition has been given him.
Through the efforts of technology and through everybody working together as a team, Stennis, has grown even more, and the shuttle program seems to be moving forward or moving ahead with tremendous strides.
The whole thing comes to Roy Estes. Ever since I met Roy Estes, he has always been the guy who could exude confidence and everything's going to be all right, hang in there.
Well, the team at Stennis Space Center have made substantial successes in the last few years. And largely, I think because of the foundations that were laid by those who came before us, and we have been successful in carrying through those with tremendous amount of support from NASA headquarters, starting with Admiral Truly, J.R. Thompson, Dr. Lenore. All have been very strong supporters of the emerging Stennis Space Center. Everybody, from the people who gave up their land to the technicians, engineers, business people, everybody who's had a part of this has made, in my view, a major contribution to the country's success in space. And the people of South Mississippi, South Louisiana, that work here have been the secret to that success.
the #1 spot, he must have insulted his mother-in-law, too.
I'm a traveling man, made a lot of stops all over the world.
Before a joint session of Congress today, President Kennedy gave this country a remarkable challenge.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal before this decade is out of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth.
Did you hear that?
Are we going to the moon? That's what the president said.
That message by President John F. Kennedy, May 25th, 1961, brings back many memories, but it really hit home for the people of South Mississippi when the government announced 5 months later to the day that it would build a test facility along the banks of the East Pearl River to test those rockets that were going to the moon.
This week's #1 song, not necessarily my #1 relative. With that comment, I guess I better be packing my bags. Here's Ricky with a song that's quickly taken over.
Throughout the area carried the announcement of the location of the test site. Generally, quiet, settled community. It was a lovely place. I was somewhat familiar with the fact that Honey Island Swamp between the two Pearl Rivers was sort of a no man's land. Also, Devil Swamp over to the east of the site here was just in low timberlands. The original policy for acquisition of the test site was the newspapers